We do tend to think of politicians in a very negative light. What we're going to talk about a little bit tonight is what to look for in leaders that will defend the Second Amendment. First thing you got to look for is not politicians, but patriots. A politician is only thinking about the next election. A patriot is thinking about the next generation. And by the end of this evening, you're going to learn how you can help to raise up an entire generation of patriots that are willing to defend not only the Second Amendment, but the entire Constitution, and how to lead effectively. In fact, you're going to hear from some of those folks tonight as well. I want to jump right in, first of all, to why I started becoming a patriot, I believe, and patriotic about what we have here in America. I, like many of you maybe, grew up a little bit spoiled when it came to freedom. Just the idea of we get to enjoy the blessings of liberty, but we don't really sometimes think about the burden that comes with that. We don't accept the burden. We don't invest our time in a way that will defend that freedom. Typically, most of the time, we just enjoy those blessings and we enjoy being free. That's certainly how it was for me. But I went to a dinner in 1994. It was the last public speech that Ronald Reagan ever gave. And as we're waiting on President Reagan to come out, they were playing some of his speeches. They had screens just like this right here, and they had them going all the way around the room, and they were playing these speeches of Ronald Reagan. We're waiting for he and Margaret Thatcher to come out. And they played this particular speech. And if you recognize the screen right there, that's Pointe du Hoc, France, Pointe du Hoc, however you want to pronounce it. But it's Pointe du Hoc. It's where our Army Rangers, 225 of Rudder's Rangers, any Aggies in the room? I know Nathan Macias is back there. Yeah, so these were Rudder's Rangers. And Rudder's Rangers, in taking those cliffs, that was the beginning of D-Day. That was the beginning of taking back an entire continent for freedom. Well, here's Reagan. It's the 40th anniversary. He's standing there atop the cliffs. The monument is behind him. And seated around him, you can kind of see in the picture there, were about 15 or 20 of those Rangers that were still alive at the time on the 40th anniversary. Of the 225, only 90 survived the mission. Here's 15 or 20 of them seated around Reagan, and Reagan starts to recount the horrific yet heroic events of that day. He starts reminding them what it was like and talking about how one would fall and another would take their place. And he's going through the whole thing, and the camera starts kind of panning across these tough old Army Rangers. Every one of them, tears welling up in their eyes as they're taken back to those days of sacrifice. And here I was probably 22 years old as I sat there and watched this on the screen. My dad's on my right. Guy on my left was a man named George McCormick. Now, Mr. McCormick was a bomber pilot in World War II. He was a great patriot, great American. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching this on the screen, and I happen to look over at Mr. McCormick as Reagan is taking us back to those days of sacrifice. And right there at that dinner, everybody in their tuxedos, Mr. McCormick's just got tears running down his face. And instantly, it suddenly hit me for the first time in my life. I began to understand the personal sacrifice of the man sitting next to me, and that he had made that sacrifice for me, so that 2 generations later, I could be free. He was willing to go around the world and die for someone he didn't even know, a generation that he didn't even know. And today, I get to live out the freedom that he was willing to die for. Well, that night, I went home. I said, man, I want to become a student of freedom. I want to honor those who died for my freedom, those who were willing to sacrifice for my freedom. I want to keep this thing alive for future generations. And I go out and give speeches, and I talk about, man, I was proud to be an American, and I talk about why we needed to preserve freedom and how important it was for us to do those things. I talk about trying to honor those who had sacrificed for our freedom, and I started thinking about that scripture that says, render honor unto whom honor is due. And I started thinking, how do you really do that? I mean, I don't, I teach my kids to walk up to somebody in uniform and say, thank you for your service, but I mean, what else can you do to truly honor that sacrifice? And then I saw this movie, Saving Private Ryan. You've probably seen the movie. You remember the story. It was a kid, had all his brothers had been killed in action. And so the military figures that out, and they're trying to find this kid, Private Ryan, and get him out of the theater. The real story was actually based on a Navy story. But anyway, they made it an Army story. And Tom Hanks plays Captain Miller. And the movie is all about Tom Hanks' team trying to find Private Ryan. And all through the movie, his guys keep getting killed. They keep laying down their lives for Private Ryan. They're dying so that Private Ryan can hopefully live. And so all through the movie, we're losing these guys. And finally, at the end of the movie, they find Private Ryan. And just as they find him, right after they find him, Captain Miller gets shot. And so Captain Miller's about to die, and Private Ryan goes over and kneels down next to him, and Captain Miller grabs Ryan by the chest, and he pulls him in, and he says 2 words, not just to Private Ryan, but to every one of us. He said, earn this. In other words, earn the sacrifice that we're making for you. All these guys had died so that Private Ryan could live. And that scene morphed from that young 19-year-old Private Ryan to 50, 60 years later. Now he's standing over the grave of Captain Miller, and he kneels down and he says to Captain Miller, he says, tell me I'm a good man. Tell me I've lived a good life. Tell me I've lived a life worthy of the sacrifice that you made for me. Earn this. That's what tonight is about. It's about learning how to earn the freedom that others fought for and many died for so that we could enjoy it.